So again, my name is Thomas Shepard. I'm a reference librarian here at the Clearwater East Community Library. I'm very passionate about cooking and seasonings. Today we're going to explore cinnamon, and hopefully you all have picked up your kit with your ingredients. So to begin, cinnamon is a tree, an evergreen tree to be exact. But it's a tropical evergreen, so it's not like an evergreen like a pine tree or a fir tree. It grows in tropical and subtropical regions. It can even grow here in Florida. So here we see the canopy of a cinnamon tree. This particular tree is a Cinnamomum vera, which is the classic cinnamon tree. I believe the cinnamons that I provided you in the kit today are Cinnamomum cassia, which is also known as Chinese cinnamon or just cassia, and Cinnamomum lauroroi, which is also known as Saigon cinnamon. They reflect the regions in which they're grown. To continue. Cinnamon has been with us. It's a spice we've been using almost as long as civilization. I chose to use this particular mummy. Let's see if we can pronounce the name. This individual is named Anaktanet Ahap. Interesting. So about 1,000 years before the Common Era. So about 3,000 years ago. Not only did the Egyptians use cinnamon in cooking, but they also used it in the mummification process. So it's likely that in this mummy, in the preparation of this mummy, there was cinnamon used as a fragrant perfume. Moving on to the ancient Greeks, about 500 years later, about the 5th century before the Common Era, Herodotus actually spoke about cinnamon in book 3 of his histories, which you can get on Hoopla. Interestingly enough, you can check this out from Hoopla as well as all of our library locations. We have Herodotus on the shelves if you're interested. Herodotus, cinnamon traveling from tropical East Asia to the Middle East and Europe was a long distance in a time where communication wasn't very good. So either the merchants themselves or the folks who consumed the cinnamon kind of came up with stories on how cinnamon was produced and harvested. So here's an anecdote from book 3 of Herodotus that you might find a little interesting about cinnamon. This is to quote Herodotus, book 3. When the Arabians go out to collect cassia, and by cassia we mean cinnamon, they cover all their body and their face with the hides of oxen and their skins, leaving only holes for the eyes, and thus protected go in search of the cassia, which grows in a lake of no great depth. All around the shores, in the lake itself, there dwell a number of winged animals, much resembling bats, which screech horribly and are very valiant. These creatures they must keep from their eyes all the while that they gather the cassia. Still more wonderful is the mode in which they collect the cinnamon. Where the wood grows and what country produces it, they cannot tell. Only some following probability relate that it comes from the country in which Bacchus was brought up. Great birds, they say, bring the sticks which we Greeks, taking the word from the Phoenicians, call cinnamon, and carry them into the air to make their nests. These are fastened with a sort of mud to a sheer face of rock, where no foot of man is able to climb. So the Arabians, to get the cinnamon, use the following artifice. They cut all the oxen and asses and beasts of burden that die in their land into large pieces, which they carry with them into those regions and place near the nests. When they withdraw to a distance, and the old birds swooping down, seize the pieces of meat and fly with them to their nests, which, not being able to support the weight, break off and fall to the ground. Hereupon the Arabians returned and collect the cinnamon, which is afterwards carried from Arabia to the other countries. So either Herodotus' contemporaries made up some big stories to keep the price of cinnamon high, or the merchants themselves made up some big stories to keep the price of cinnamon high, or maybe these were just confused travelers who saw something like a fruit bat and decided it was a terrified winged creature, which is also possible. Just an interesting anecdote about cinnamon and the early days of cinnamon consumption. Moving on, this particular image is from the Qing Dynasty in China, from about the 16th century, so 1500 years later. So this particular image shows a cinnamon tree and the cinnamon tree trunk. That's where we're going to get our cinnamon, which is the bark of the cinnamon. This image here is another illustration. This is from a botanical illustration from the 1830s, and it shows the classic cinnamon, the Cinnamomum vera, up close. So from the bark, we carve the bark off the tree, and it looks like almost like classic tree bark. And then as it dries, it curls around the edges, and it comes to resemble the cinnamon we know and love. The sticks, the cinnamon sticks, that we see are the shape that they take after dried are the sort of classic swirls. That's just the bark drying and curling at the edges. Let's see if our video is coming back here. Let me make sure we'll go ahead and share our work surface. You never can tell what's going to happen with Zoom. It's always a work in progress. So let me see if I can share our work surface camera. Might be a little more helpful. All right, so we're still having trouble with our camera, so give me just one moment. Let me try to address this situation. All right, finally we have our camera. Everyone can see the workspace now. Okay, good. The delay here. Let's see if we can get our other camera going here. All right, looks like my laptop camera is not cooperating today, but that's okay. We'll roll with it. All right, from our workspace, we can see our equipment today. So we have a few things here. We have the spices that were provided in your kit. We've got our mortar and pestle. We have assorted measuring tools and a whisk. Today, since we're using cinnamon, I'm going to show you a few different ways to process it. We have a microplane or a grater. You can also use a cheese grater at home. The finest grate is the one you want to go for. Today, we're also going to take a look at a magic bullet type machine. So we'll go ahead and get started. So if we want to crack open cinnamon, we'll start with our classic cassia. And one thing you'll notice as you process is that it will smell better and better. So if you smell just the dry branch, it has a vaguely cinnamon smell. But as we prepare it that smell is going to get even more intense because we're opening up the substance. We're exposing more oils and more essential oils and more flavors as we process it. So what we can do, we'll go ahead and start with the microplane or the grater. So I'll just set this piece of paper here so you can see the sort of quality of grates. So this actually will create almost a fine powder. If you can kind of see sort of almost a classic cinnamon powder. It's got a nice, it's almost a dusty grate. Whereas something like our mortar and pestle, what you want to do is break it up, and the cassia is very nice in that it's nice and dry and sort of accommodates the mortar and pestle. However, it's hard to get really fine quality, a really fine quality powder with the mortar and pestle without a lot of work and a lot of time. So what we want to do is we're gonna try a little force multiplier here. This is just a basic magic bullet. You can also use a coffee grinder. And what we're gonna do is we'll take a look at both blades and see how they perform for us. We've got the flat blade, and for this particular substance for cinnamon, this is the one people recommend. And then this one is more for chopping things like wet produce or things that might be a little more oily than our cinnamon. So we'll go ahead and start with our more mellow blade, our two-bladed blade here, and we'll go ahead and just drop it right in. Okay. And this particular one just plugs in and you push the button. Plug and push the button. Let me see if I can get a good angle to where we can still see it. What I'm going to do actually is we'll do it off camera for a moment. And listen to it fire up here. So again, we're using our magic bullet with our single blade. And we've got a few flakes that we already started in our mortar, as well as a whole flake. We're going to see how this thing does here. All right. So that was two 1/2 bursts. And so a good rule to follow when you're using a machine like this is never let it run for more than 3 seconds, because it will actually start to cook your cinnamon, and that'll burn up some of those delicious oils, basically what gives cinnamon its flavor. So I think you could use, we're looking at we're flaking up nicely. So let's give it 2 or 3 more bursts at about the same length, and we'll see how we do. All right, so that was 3 more 1 or 2 second bursts. So we'll take a look at how we're doing. So we're nearly there to a powder. It really doesn't take long at all when it comes to one of our coffee grinders or one of our magic bullets. So let's go ahead and Let's try the other blade and see how we do with it, and we'll note the difference. So that's our cassia. We're going to keep them separate for now. Let's check out our cinnamomum Loriroy, aka Saigon cinnamon. Now, I'd recommend, especially if you're going for subtleness of flavor, to have multiple cups like this. But when you're using your magic bullet to grind spices, obviously those oils from the spices will take their toll on your vessel here. But that's okay. We'll go ahead and process the Saigon cinnamon. And then as you process these two, take note of not only the shape. You'll notice that the Saigon cinnamon is a lot thicker. And it has basically one layer, whereas our cassia had multiple layers and it was a lot thinner. You'll also notice a difference in aroma. Our cassia has a really mellow aroma, real just classic cinnamon. The cinnamon vera, the classic cinnamon that we took a look at in our PowerPoint, that is the most desired cinnamon by chefs. It does have sort of a higher price point, but in my opinion, as far as value and flavor, I really like the Saigon cinnamon. So we're gonna go ahead and throw this whole cinnamon stick right here in our magic bullet, but we're gonna try it with the bigger blades, and you'll notice an interesting thing happening there. That was a lot louder and a lot less of a finer result. So I believe it has something to do with the surface area. There's less surface area on the blades, impacting the surface area of the cinnamon versus this has less room for the cinnamon to move around and take the next cut. So when you're using big dry spices and a coffee grinder, blades like this tend to do a lot better than your chopping blades. So we'll go ahead and switch back over to this one. All right. Then our cassia, we ended up with a lot finer of a powder with about the same amount of time ground. And there's also I'd say it has a slightly lighter color too. We'll compare the two. This is a slightly darker, this one's slightly lighter. This is a finer texture. This one's a little rougher, a little heavier, a little grainier. The grain is very palpable, whereas our Saigon is a little less intense. So we'll keep thinking about it. For those of us who just came to, we went over our microplane as well. So let's try our microplane and see what sort of results we can get. We just used our white sheet of paper. So that was our cassia. See how we do with our Saigon. So it crumbles a lot easier. So I would say that our Saigon cinnamon, our cinnamon Loriroy, has a finer texture than our cassia. The aroma and the flavor is also a little more pronounced, a little spicier. So finally, let's go ahead and process the rest of our Saigon cinnamon. I believe I gave all of you about the same amount in your kits too. So we'll go ahead and process the rest. So we're going to do some short bursts of about 1 or 2 seconds each. We'll see how we do with 3 with our magic bullet. Once again, we're going to use our single blade as opposed to our chopping blade. All right. So once again, you can see the sort of dust rising from our Saigon cinnamon. It just has a finer texture. So we'll go ahead and add it to our supply. So we've got our cinnamon Leroy and our cinnamon cassia, Chinese cinnamon, Saigon cinnamon. All right. So moving right along, let's start with our 4-to-1 cinnamon spice. So there's a reason that we separated our turmeric from the rest of the ingredients. Because what we want to do is, this is not processed yet, whereas our turmeric is processed. So when you're working with this dried turmeric, just leave it out until you're ready to add it to your recipe, because it loves to stain everything. And if you're dealing with this powder, it's already processed, so there really is no need to use it in your processing method. So this one is a good example of your microplane is actually going to work better. This is our nutmeg. Your microplane will work better with nutmeg than with our other items, because nutmeg is oily inside. So when you use it in the mortar, it will crush, but you have a hard time making a powder. When you use it in our magic bullet, it likes to turn into a paste. So I found the best way to use nutmeg is with a microplane or a grater. So we'll go ahead and grate it right into this bowl. And then a quick word on, you'll notice on your recipe card, it calls for parts. And today our parts are going to be 1/4 teaspoons. So that is 1 part for all of our recipes. And in the kits we provided you, so each item is 1 part, is a 1/4 tablespoon. So let's take a moment. We'll see if anybody has any questions or comments so far. Once again, I'm having difficulties with my laptop today. It has decided not to film, but we're rolling with it. Let's see here. Does anyone have any questions at all? Feel free to unmute yourselves or raise your hands. All right, we'll keep moving right along. So back to our nutmeg and our nutmeg grater. So what you want to do, just so you can, there really isn't any special method to it. You just grate it right into the bowl. Keep your fingers away from the grooves. We used it earlier for our cinnamon. You'll notice when you grate the nutmeg, get a look at the inside there. So you grate the nutmeg, an explosion of aroma comes from it as we grate it. It's like opening up a package of nutmeg flavor, and it's fantastic. So we'll keep going. What we want for this particular recipe we're looking for 1 part nutmeg, 4 parts unsweet cocoa powder, 4 parts turmeric, 4 parts cinnamon. As you already probably know, we didn't include any cocoa powder in this recipe, so because it's good without the cocoa too, as a sweet spice. So try it without cocoa and then add your favorite cocoa in these ratios. 4 to 1, it's called a 4 to 1 because we got 4 parts of everything else and 1 part nutmeg. So once again, it grates beautifully when you're using one of these microplanes. I'm thinking that's about one of our parts here. So let's test it out. Let's test our theory here. Oh yeah, we got at least a 1/4 teaspoon. So we'll go ahead and throw that in there. So for this particular recipe, I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and use up our cassia. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 4 parts cinnamon, and do yourself a favor and smell the nutmeg before you add the cinnamon to it, and then also smell the cinnamon before you add the nutmeg to it by themselves on their own. And then as you add, kind of smell the way they interact with each other, which is you see many, especially for sweet items, many recipes call for nutmeg and cinnamon because they bring out a lot of good things flavor-wise and aroma-wise. Let's see, that was 1, 2, 3. I believe that was 4. Looks like 4. Well, since we're using teaspoons, we can also look back and see if that made about a full teaspoon. So yep, that was 4. So we've got our nutmeg and cinnamon. And now for our turmeric. And in this case, for this particular sweet recipe, the turmeric, I mean, it's very in vogue right now, health benefits wise, very healthy for you. But it's also going to add a wonderful color. And then flavor wise, turmeric is sort of like a mild ginger. So it's going to, it's going to add a nice, mellow sort of ginger flavor. You could compare the flavors to something like a pumpkin spice if you're going to use it in coffee or throw some on ice cream. Also, a whisk makes a really good mixer because you're able to agitate the ingredients, but also let them flow freely. So the turmeric is also, it also sort of creates a whole new, when you have the turmeric flavors interacting with the nutmeg and the cinnamon, it creates a whole new kind of unique flavor, especially in the context of sweet foods. So this is going to be our only sweet recipe today. So what you do, you can see how colorful it is. See, that is going to stain, that will stain, good old turmeric will stain everything. So as far as this recipe, you want to take this, because this is pretty potent by itself, and add it to 4 more parts of your favorite sweetener. So you can use sugar, you can use turbinado sugar, white sugar. You can also use something like Splenda. They make that baking Splenda, which is 1-to-1 sugar, or stevia. Just be aware of what ratio stevia versus sugar. So always, if you're using something other than sugar, always find out how much of that ingredient equals sugar. So give it a try. It's great sprinkled over ice cream. It's great. You can actually flavor cookies with it. You can even, a really neat thing, this is about enough right here. Take this and add it to a brownie mix or a chocolate cheesecake, like even a chocolate cake, and it will add a new element and it'll complement the chocolate beautifully. So give it a try. I'm gonna go back to our main room and see if anybody has any questions. Once again, I'm sorry about my laptop camera today. Does anyone have any questions about our 4-to-1 cinnamon spice? Give it just a moment before we start our next one. All right, let's keep going. All right, so next, we're going to take a look at our rib rub. So your next recipe card and kit will be our cinnamon rib rub, which is the rest of our recipes today are going to be savory recipes as opposed to sweet recipes. Because if you're like me, when considering cinnamon, often it's used in sweets and cakes. So let's check out our rib rub. So we'll go ahead and give our cassia a break for the rest of the day, and we're going to move over to our Saigon cinnamon, our Lori Roy. So this one's pretty straightforward. Share our screen again. All right, so this one's pretty straightforward. We've already mixed it up with your brown sugar and our other ingredients. Our ingredients of this particular recipe include cinnamon, obviously, brown sugar. This one has crushed red pepper, salt, and garlic. So you'll notice how it's a little bit unrefined, a little bit chunky. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to try our mortar and pestle with this one, because right now we have some. Let me get close to the camera. We've got our red pepper flakes in there. We've got our chunks of brown sugar. So also to thin out the body of this a little bit, let's add our cinnamon before we process it. So once again, take note of how it smells. It smells like garlic and red pepper at the moment. We're going to throw some Saigon cinnamon in there. The recipe calls for 2 parts cinnamon. Once again, our parts are a 1/4 teaspoon. We're going to go 1, 2. All right. Mix it up a little bit with our whisk. Our red pepper and our brown sugar is still pretty flaky. So at this point, you could do a few things with it. You could add it to some white vinegar and create a sort of Carolina barbecue sauce or mop. You could add it to ketchup just by itself and create sort of a unique barbecue sauce or a unique sort of dipping sauce. There's a number of things you could do with it. Treat it like a Carolina sort of rib rub spice blend. But what we want to do with it is do a rib rub. These pieces are way too big to rib rub. So actually, I think we need some smaller pieces than that. We need more of a fine powder. So let's go back to our magic bullet with this one. I'm looking at these big. There's 2 reasons. I know we said we were going to get out our our mortar and pestle, but I'm thinking that's going to make a mess in our mortar and pestle, because this is a granite mortar and it is porous. So if you're using something like sugar, it will penetrate those pores and make things a little harder to clean. It's okay to do, but for our purposes, we'll leave it alone. We'll leave the heavy artillery alone for now and go back to our magic bullet, because we're looking for a nice fine powder to use as a rib rub or a poultry rub, or something to use for meat. So we'll go ahead and once everything's mixed up, throw it back in there. There's a little bit of cinnamon left over from before. but that's okay. So once again, I'm gonna guess I'm thinking we need maybe 1 or 2 bursts for this one. We'll try, then we'll see how we did, okay? All right, so we did 2 bursts with our magic bullet. Okay, and that created our nice fine powder. Because we were almost there. We were almost there with our sizes, but let's go ahead and dump it in here and see how we did. Get all that good stuff out of here. Yeah. Now, be careful when you're you know, opening up your magic bullet. There is a little bit of dust in the air, and the red pepper will get up your nose and burn a little. But now that we have a finer powder, this actually would probably mix better in your sauces, and also just be easier to, rub on your meats. So give it a try for your next barbecue. This would also be delicious mixed into hamburger. Go ahead and use your ground beef or your ground turkey and fold it right into the beef or other ground meat, turkey, etc. Throw that on the grill and it would be pretty good. So let's go ahead and go back to the chat. We'll see if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments so far? All right, let's check out our last recipe today. Once again, I apologize for our laptop camera. It is just not cooperating today, so let's keep going here. All right, so let's move on to, we're still going to stick with our Saigon cinnamon, our Cinnamomum Leroy. We're going to check out our red hot cinnamon spice. So this one is, at its core, it's kind of a Creole seasoning, especially with the oregano and thyme, as well as the elements of cayenne. So what we did here is for heat, we have our cayenne pepper. For color, we have our paprika because we want this thing to stay red. Also, our Saigon cinnamon will help keep it red too. So let's go ahead and see what we're working with here. This one, the cinnamon is going to end up bringing out a lot of the flavors that are already in here. We've got cinnamon, we've got cumin, we've got oregano, thyme, paprika, cayenne pepper, and salt. So this one's a little spicy, but that's okay. So when we open it up, you're going to get a big whiff, a great big whiff of that cumin. And then at the end, after the cumin kind of shakes your hand, you'll get into those herbs a little bit too. And then after you hear from the herbs, you'll end up finishing out with a little bit of that paprika. There's a little peppery note in there too. It all sort of comes together into a pleasant, sort of bright aroma. So let's see what it does when we add cinnamon to it. So it calls for 2 parts cinnamon. Once again, our parts are the teaspoon. So with our Saigon cinnamon, 1, 2, And then this one's pretty straightforward. Give it a stir. And then see how we did. Let's see what that changed as far as our aroma. So not only did the cinnamon sort of mellow out the cumin in a big way, like the cumin isn't really the first sort of aroma anymore at all. The cinnamon and the cumin are sort of doing a yin yang thing and balancing one another out. And so once we add the cinnamon, the other notes, especially the peppers, come through in a big way, which I think is the most interesting. It has a real, you really get those red peppers because both paprika and the cayenne pepper are both red peppers, and the cinnamon balancing out the cumin lets those peppers shine through in a really nice way. So this particular recipe, I love to use it for grilling. So, you know, oil and vinegar or salt and oil your chicken breasts or other, you know, even a pork loin. You can use this as a rub for your pork loin. You know, throw it on the grill, and the paprika also has a really nice way of caramelizing when you're grilling as well. But, you know, a little bit will go a long way. It's got a good amount of cayenne pepper, so it's nice and spicy for you as well. Yeah. So to finish off today, let's do, I really like to hear your questions and comments. Once again, our camera is not being helpful to us today. So let's see if I can, let's see if we can go back to our chat page. Let's see here. Okay, yes, Joan, thank you for your question. Yes, the cinnamomum Leroy is our Saigon cinnamon versus our Cinnamomum cassia, which is our Chinese cinnamon. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? What's everybody going to use their recipes for? Feel free to unmute yourselves if you like. Oh, yeah, Samantha says she's going to try the 4-to-1 is going in coffee. So be sure, Samantha, to add it to a sweetener. Don't use it by itself because it'll be a little intense for you. Unless you could try like a nice black coffee. There's delicious black coffees that stand by themselves, flavor-wise, and this might complement, but a little bit will go a long way for that particular spice. Which recipe were you trying on rice tonight? Joan.
I think the spicy one.
Oh, that's going to be delicious. I'd recommend maybe upping the salt a little bit.
Okay.
Unless you're against salt, up your salt, or even you cook your rice in a stock or a broth. That would really be good.
Okay.
And it's also going to add a nice red color to your rice as well.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. And then also our rib rub, I forgot to mention this. It has the brown sugar in there. Let's go back to our share screen. Once again, I'm sorry for my laptop, everyone. This happens sometimes, but it's okay. We work through it. I'll show you this real fast. So on our rib rub, we have our brown sugar in there. We processed it into a nice powder. So that sugar in there will caramelize beautifully and take those flavors of garlic and red pepper with it. on something like a Brussels sprout. So if you've ever grilled Brussels sprouts, go ahead and put them on skewers. Maybe moisten them with some olive oil, or even a little bit of your favorite vinegar, like a balsamic vinegar or red wine vinegar. Even a champagne vinegar might be good. And then use this, dust your veggies with this, throw them on the grill, and you'll get a lot of good compliments, I believe. Does anyone have any other questions about cinnamon at all, or ideas? So, and I'm looking forward to our in-person programming when we start that back up. I don't have a specific date, but hopefully we can all get together soon in person. Because this class especially is really great in person. It's really fun. All the smells and all the conversations that we have. So I see this as sort of a stopgap between now and then. If anyone has, if there's no further questions, I'd like to wish everybody a happy Saturday and to have a great weekend. And thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We're doing it again next month. So something new every month, hopefully. And we'll have a better camera next time.
Yes. Can you, if you have a chance, teach how to do the yellow rice? Put some spice in the rice and
Okay.
make it into the yellow rice.
Definitely. I'll look into that for next month. I believe next month we're working with garlic. So
Okay. Thank you.
I will
Yum.
definitely come up with a delicious garlic recipe of some kind. So, and always, as usual, feel free to reach out. If there's a particular recipe that you tweaked and got really good results with, that's very much encouraged. Or if you have a favorite recipe, I'm always really happy to hear about that. Once again, I'm Thomas Shepard. I'm a reference librarian here at the Clearwater East Community Library. And enjoy dinner if you decide to use your blend on dinner tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too.
For more inspiration and some great recipes that call for cinnamon, check out In Bibi's Kitchen, the recipes and stories of grandmothers from the 8 African countries that touch the Indian Ocean by Hawa Hassan. Available now at the Clearwater East Community Library at SPC.